Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. The House subcommittee probing the origins of COVID-19 is shining a spotlight on the hypotheses that was once silenced and mocked as conspiracy theory. While lawmakers tell us getting to the bottom of the search will prove challenging, they won't cease on trying. Joining us from the Capitol, we have NTD's Melina Wisecup. So Melina, what are some of the key takeaways from the committee's first hearing today?
One big takeaway from this hearing was that lawmakers from both sides of the aisle expressed a willingness to look into the possibility of a lab leak. Now, this is in light of those new details emerging and after the FBI director publicly endorsed this as a possibility. But overall, lawmakers are still largely in the dark.
The truth is, we don't know the origins of COVID-19 yet for sure. We don't have a smoking gun. These have never been seen before in any other viruses of its type.
Both parties were also united in expressing a discontent with the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up of the COVID origins. Congressman Ami Bera saying that if not for this, the virus would have not caused as much damage as it did. Here's Congressman Bera speaking on this point to me after this hearing.
The lack of transparency, the lack of, from day one, allowing the world's best scientists to get into the hot zone to understand what was going on probably has prevented us from getting control of this pandemic much faster.
Now, there were moments that deviated from this topic because some lawmakers took issue with one of the witnesses, Nicholas Wade, accusing him of having racist views based on a book he wrote in 2014. Wade denied these allegations. Now, as for why the lab leak theory was suppressed for so long, some Republicans have pointed fingers at our government.
I think they had a narrative. They wanted to continue with a narrative. So I think the American people deserve to know answers on why their government actually clamped down and took away the liberties and freedoms that our Constitution grants us as American citizens.
Now, another witness, Dr. Metzel, repeatedly stated that he believes there was a false consensus pushed on the public from the beginning as an effort to shift perception about the pandemic. After the hearing, I asked him why he thinks this false consensus was pushed on the public, and his answer was along the lines that there are so many who have invested decades in building scientific collaborations.
We can't buy those collaborations by just closing our eyes when there is obvious wrongdoing. And a scientist in China is very different than a scientist in the United States. Maybe a great person, maybe when a critically important issue is at stake, cannot speak openly or honestly.
This is the first of many hearings, and later this week, lawmakers may inch closer to uncovering more details. A floor vote is scheduled for Friday in the House that would urge the intelligence community to declassify as much information as they can about the CCP virus. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Melina, thank you. Arizona Congresswoman Debbie Lesko sits on the committee to investigate the origins of COVID. She was on the Hill earlier today asking a series of questions to witnesses who came to testify, and we're happy to have the Congresswoman joining us now. Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, Congresswoman, as a member of the committee investigating the origins of COVID, you had your first hearing today, some calling it an explosive one at that. Were you satisfied with the testimony you heard, and do you still feel as though there are some unanswered questions?
Well, yes, I was satisfied with the witnesses' testimony. I thought some new information came out, as well as existing information that we already knew, but that was confirmed. But there's still questions, and there will be questions because China covered it up. And so we'll continue to have questions. There are questions revolving Dr. Fauci's involvement with trying to promote just one thesis, that it was original origin of COVID. But we're going to get to the bottom of it.
To your point, Congresswoman, you mentioned Dr. Fauci. Why do you think we did see certain people and agencies within our own government downplaying this lab leak theory?
Well, I asked Dr. Redfield that today. He was one of the witnesses. He was the former CDC director, and for the last 40 years, he has been studying viruses, and he's a virologist. And so I asked him, why did Dr. Fauci believe that it was a natural origin? COVID came from natural origin. And why did he try to silence anybody who thought otherwise? And he said he thought that Dr. Fauci was going by what had happened in the past with SARS and MERS, and that it wouldn't have spread to humans. But Dr. Redfield told him, he told him right from the beginning, this is different. I'm a virologist. This is different. This is going from humans to humans at a very fast pace. And SARS and MERS did not do that. In fact, to this date, it's very hard to replicate a coronavirus 19 virus in bats. So another testimony that came out of this was that another doctor testified that the Chinese government has tested over 100,000 animals in China, and not one single animal, has the coronavirus virus in them, which is very unusual. So a lot of very strange things are happening. Dr. Redfield, again, the former CDC director, believes that the virus COVID-19 came from the Wuhan lab. He also believes that gain-of-function research was happening at the Wuhan lab. He also believes that the U.S. government was funding part of that research.
Congresswoman, do you think this raises deeper concerns and questions potentially about the level of influence that the CCP has in American society?
I definitely do believe that the Chinese government tried to cover this up. I am very concerned that U.S. tax dollars were used for what I believe is gain-of-function research. Now, in a previous hearing, I asked the acting NIH director, National Institute of Health director, which gave out the grant to EcoHealth Alliance, which gave out a sub-grant to the Wuhan lab to do virus studies. I asked him if U.S. tax dollars were being used to study coronavirus. He denied it. He said, no, absolutely not. It was totally different. And then I followed up with him and I said, how would you know that? Because the Chinese deleted the virus sequences in September of 2019. You didn't get the reports on the grants that you were supposed to get. How would you know that they weren't doing coronavirus research? There's no way that he could tell that they weren't doing gain-of-function research on coronavirus at the Wuhan lab. And so there's a lot of inconsistencies here, you know, people saying different things. And that's why this committee is so important, that we are getting the emails that we're going to and from Dr. Fauci. And we're going to keep investigating this because it's important. I mean, 7 million people in the world died. That's at a minimum. One of the witnesses today, who's a Democrat, by the way, said they believe it was 20 million people in the world died from COVID-19. And in addition, it's important when we determine our policies if we want to continue to fund gain-of-function research. Dr. Redfield thinks we should have a moratorium on it. We should have a discussion about, do we really want to fund this risky research on viruses that may leak from the lab? And he believes that that risky research, gain-of-function research, was done at the Wuhan lab. It was partially funded by the United States, and it was accidentally leaked.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Biden administration is facing pressure to crack down on drug cartels amid the kidnappings and killings of U.S. citizens. This as Republicans call for getting tougher on the southern border. NTD's R-Ariz has more from the White House.
The kidnapping in Mexico last week, which left 2 U.S. citizens dead, is renewing calls for the Biden administration to strengthen border security and crack down on drug cartels. And Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on Wednesday called for using U.S. troops in Mexico to go after the drug cartels.
We're going to unleash the fury and might of the United States against these cartels.
And he urges the administration to designate at least 9 Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs.
It means that all the precursors coming from China, Chinese chemical companies and Chinese enterprises, would be subject to being prosecuted under U.S. law for providing material support to foreign terrorist organizations, something you can't do today.
But the White House on Wednesday would not voice support for that idea, saying there had been sanctions already in place.
Look, designating these cartels as FTOs would not grant us any additional authorities that we don't really have at this time. So the United States has powerful sanctions authorities specifically designated to combat narcotics trafficking organizations.
And when it comes to using troops in Mexico,
I'm just not going to get into the military and how it's being used.
The White House says the U.S. is working with the Mexican government to pursue those involved in the latest attack. But Republicans say Mexico has long been a safe haven for drug cartels, adding that if it does not cooperate, the U.S. should take stronger measures to protect national security. Reporting from the White House, R-Ariz, NTD News.
Various Democrats have shifted their stance on the D.C. crime bill. Today, the Senate voted on a resolution to block the controversial bill.
The Senate on Wednesday passed a resolution to agree with the House and block the D.C. crime bill. The resolution is now heading to President Biden's desk. In early February, the White House issued a statement indicating that Biden would veto the decision. The statement said the resolution is an example of how the District of Columbia continues to be denied true self-governance and why it deserves statehood. However, on a visit to a Democratic caucus luncheon last week, the president reportedly said, "If you pass it, I will sign it." On Wednesday, before the vote, some Democrats voiced their frustration with the resolution, saying the federal government shouldn't interfere in local decisions. The government can do so in this case because D.C. is not a state. However, this would mark the first time in 30 years that federal lawmakers use that power. The crime bill implemented by the D.C. City Council would have lessened penalties for violent crime. This comes as the Washington Metropolitan Police Department reports a 33% increase in homicides compared to last year, a 120% uptick in sexual abuse, and a 108% increase in motor vehicle theft. Before the vote, Senator James Langford criticized the D.C. City Council for trying to implement the law at this time.
In the middle of rampant increase in crime in Washington, D.C., the D.C. City Council's response to this, in an overwhelming vote, was to reduce penalties for felonies.
Senator Bill Hagerty is the lead sponsor of the resolution's Senate version. On Wednesday, he said this will be one of the only opportunities during this Congress for this body to send a broad message on violent crime, a message that may impact the safety and security of Americans throughout our nation. Reporting by Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.